The fault lines that divide our churches now don't divide us along denominational lines. They divide us along ideological lines. And we have to begin to address this question in a real way.
You were saying that the center of the communion is the Bishop of Rome, or the Pope. But when we say we're looking for unity, let's say with the Russian Orthodox Church, we don't say we're looking for unity with the Russian Patriarch. Is this just some kind of semantical difference? Or is this some kind of favoring on the part of Latin Church to speak about communion with Pope rather than communion with the Church of Rome?
Are there people in the Russian Orthodox Church who either privately or publicly would say, you know what, we really should give that 1946 Synod a second thought, and perhaps we'll see it differently than the Greek Catholics, but not quite as differently as we would have in 1946.
Vatican II calls for the Eastern Catholic churches to rule themselves. This is still delayed and impeded because of Roman interference. I note, as aside, when you have an authority above what you consider the high authority, when the lower levels among the clergy don't like what their authority says, they then turn around and go to the higher authority above the high authority. And now you get the interference going on. And I have to note, not with all the details, but at the present time our synod is in this quagmire. In the last several years, we've had direct interference from Roman authorities in 5 or 6 of our dioceses throughout the Middle East because of a group of disgruntled priests who didn't like their bishop and went above the head of the synod and above the head of the patriarch and went to Rome. For instance, right now, our bishop in Jordan, a very decent man, was given a Latin Rite auxiliary with full authority over his head. And he is the bishop to wear the crown and celebrate the services. But the Latin Rite auxiliary runs his church.
What I'm curious is your last comment, that they will become Latin Catholics. I would have thought that the difference of 50 years ago and today is that many who go to Eastern Rite Catholic churches are unlikely to go to Latin Catholic schools in the U.S., Canada is slightly different, are unlikely to know terribly much about the Latin Catholic Church, particularly those of newer immigrants, are more likely to have contacts with people or other children who come from Orthodox or Oriental churches. That is, isn't the shadow well over the clergy and the church organized? I understand the Latin Catholic Church casts a large shadow. Does it really now, for many of the faith, particularly those newer immigrants who arrived, who will not experience America 50 years ago and the huge organization that once in the U.S. existed for the Latin Catholic Church? And I would think that would make a very different situation for them.
An unpublished statistical study of demographics in Canada, about 10 years ago, so it's dated, demonstrates that transference of adhesion shifts across the country for Ukrainians. So the east, the shift will be predominantly to the Orthodox Church. As you go west, it becomes Roman Catholic, then good old BC, it becomes anything. Which simply suggests, and the demographer who's doing this suggested that it's simply a matter of one generation actually, until that goes farther, like away from the Eastern churches. So it might, the homelands question might solve one generation, but that's all.
But it would still argue the Catholic school system in Canada makes a difference, which doesn't exist anymore in the U.S. in most areas.
Ukrainian Greco-Catholics continue to hold on to the patriarchal provision for their church. But the Orthodox scene has changed immensely within the Ukrainian nation. In the new situation, some of the initiatives of the Greco-Catholics have been construed as misguided or even aggressively proselytizing. With the creation of an Orthodox Kievan Patriarchate, does a Greco-Catholic Patriarchate serve the cause of unity or further disunity? think it's a legitimate question. The decision to move the primatial see from Lviv to Kiev for the church was not initially well received. And yet, given the demographic situation, can one argue that the Greco-Catholic territory can be limited to Western Ukraine?
Church rights flow from church dignity, just as human rights flow from human dignity. Probably that is the reason for the recognition of the dignity of the churches almost at the outset of the decree. The fact that these are the rights of the Eastern churches means that these churches need not appeal to the benevolence and charity of anyone for their exercise, and that they have grounds for grievance when they are denied the possibility of the exercise of these rights. The rights are not mere concessions or permissions granted by the Council or by the papacy. Most of them are only recognized by the Council. They originate from the dignity of these churches, the recognition of which is fundamental to the recognition of rights. The dignity of these churches permits them the freedom of self-determination to a great extent.
A really good Greek Orthodox friend of mine, late pastor on Long Island, used to refer to the little entrance as taking the gospel out for air. And you know, you think of it, what else are people going to imagine is going on? Because of course it's originally a procession that you can eventually, the way it's done now, can only be interpreted allegorically. So, you know, the peasantry, these poor people in Western Ukraine get it right when they say, oh, here's this, you know, I'm not interested in kind of allegorical interpretation of, you know, Christ coming into the world. So, you know, the gospel is here. I want to kiss it. The gospel, which has been on the holy table the whole time, is now in my midst. I want to approach it. And at that point, you don't need to explain with any kind of allegory what's going on. This is an anticipatory veneration of the gospel. It's anticipatory because we're going to hear that same word in about 5-10 minutes.